Welcome back to Uncinched, the unfiltered horse podcast you didn't know you needed, where we uncinch what's really going on in the horse world.
Today's episode is part of our Guts series, and we're diving into the topic of horse loss. And yeah, it is as raw as it sounds. Before we get into this episode, we wanted to give a bit of a trigger warning today, as we will be talking about trauma specifically surrounding the themes of horse death.
We wish our journeys with horses were all sunshine and rainbows, but, that's just not real life. There are ups and downs that shape us, and those hard moments really show us what we're made of. But if these topics feel a little too heavy for you, that's totally understandable. We will not take offense to you skipping it.
While horses, for the majority of us, is our happy place, we want to talk about those not so happy moments that are sometimes inevitable and unavoidable. One of those things is saying goodbye to our best friends, the horse. We want to share our experiences with you, help you prepare, and help you to be seen, and to also show you that you are not alone if you are going through something similar. We also want to give you some advice on these tough topics, because honestly, good advice surrounding not so awesome situations is sometimes hard to come by.
Truly. We're not here to glorify trauma, truly, or pretend it's all for a greater purpose, but we do want to show you how you can still grow through it. It is shitty. Plain and simple. And no, your trauma, grief, or your response is not wrong or invalid. It's yours to experience. Period. And no one can tell you how or what to feel. We hope this episode at least can help support those who are going through the loss of their horse. If we can help you go through that process with a tiny bit of ease after listening today, we will be super grateful and honored to have helped you out. This episode is also going to run a little differently than how we normally do it, as we're going to discuss Taya's own personal experience. So we decided to be a bit more interview style, and I'll be speaking less and giving her space to tell her story.
Okay, guys, bear with me. This is a tough one. Today, I wanted to share with you my story on how I lost one of my dearest horses. His death taught me a lot about our horse's mortality and the challenges it brings beyond the obvious sadness and grief that is felt during situations like this. So, let's get right into it. First, I want to just acknowledge how special this horse was to me. Sir Galahad was his name, and he was as regal and noble as his name. He was a big black Percheron Canadian who was built like a brick shithouse, but he moved so sensitively and lightly. Gal was a horse who was gifted to me. He and I had a very special connection. He opened a lot of doors for me, and he was a horse who I learned so much from. He was a bit of a grump, but after a few years of owning him, he really opened up and let down his guard and showed me that he was a huge softie underneath his big tough exterior. Funny enough, actually, before I owned him, Britain actually took lessons on him.
Yeah, I think that's so funny. I remember Sir Galahad. He was a huge horse. I think I was like 12 at the time. And I can just remember how big his feet were. Trying to pick those things out, oh my gosh, they were so heavy. This also goes to show how interconnected paths can be. I am a big believer in fate, and I really do think there's a bigger picture in some paths that get crossed for a reason. And Tay and I have actually crossed so many paths without realizing it over the years. So what I'm basically trying to get at is that this podcast partnership was fate.
I think it was too. And you guys were meant to be listening to this, and maybe you will cry in a couple moments, and it was fate. I'm sorry, I didn't decide it. Fate did. Yeah, fate is a great way to say that. I felt fate was a big part of why Sir Galahad and I had found each other. We were truly meant to be together. He came into my life when I was around 13 or so, and he just took care of me. He was the perfect horse, and he had the coolest resume. He was a jumper, a ranch horse, an RCMP police horse, and he even was used in those medieval festivals as a jousting horse. Like, who owns a horse that has done all those things?
I think it's really cool to show the spectrum too. He was a jumper as a Percheron Canadian.
Yeah. Like, this horse was a legend, and I just really want you guys to hone in and feel that, like, this guy was the coolest. I owned him later in his life when he was about, 14 or so, and then I retired him at 23. I was hoping that he would live out his days in my pasture where I could love on him until it was his time, as every good horse deserves a loving retirement. Unfortunately, his retirement only lasted for about a year, and his life ended traumatically for both him and I. He died on a morning like any other. It was mid-July, and in the mornings, my herd would go out to the back part of my pasture to have a squad nap. The grass was long back there, so they loved going out in the mornings to have a little snooze. I was up for work around 6:30 that morning, and I took a peek out my window where I saw everyone napping, and nothing looked unusual. So I continued to get ready, and about 20 or so minutes later, I got a call from my renter who also lived on the property I was at, saying that she could see that the herd had all come up towards the house for some water, but Gal, my horse, was still way out in the back in the napping pen, and he was moving funny. She said he was weaving. It wasn't abnormal for him to hang out alone, so I just thought it was weird that she described that he was weaving. So I was like, well, I'll go take a look and just to be safe, right? So I go out there. I think I was honestly still in my pajamas. And as I got close to him, I was calling at him, seeing if he would come to me, and he was whinnying and nickering at me, but I could tell he was unable to move. He sounded like he was scared, saying like, hey, come here, I need some help. But I couldn't see his legs because the grass was long, but I could hear the sound of barbed wire reefing, and I figured, oh boy, he got his leg stuck in the fence, or something was stuck in the fence. We had just replaced the nails and tightened all the wire on the property, so I was pretty disappointed to see that he had gotten caught in it. But as we know, horses always find a way to get themselves in silly situations. By the time I got to him and realized what he had done, my heart sank right into my stomach. My best guess was that he laid down a little too close to the fence, and then as he went to get up, he rolled over towards the fence, and he got one of his hind legs wrapped in the second strand from the bottom in the wire. He managed somehow to stand up, and when I got to him, he was standing in a puddle of his own blood where the wire had torn up his leg to the bone. He had been pulling and pulling to try to get away from it, but the result of that only made things worse for him. He was drenched in sweat from being frantic. He was totally afraid. He was in that terrible fight or flight mode, and he was just stressed.
As an owner, that must have been such a scary experience and a disheartening one as well. Trying not to panic to the point that you aren't able to help would be incredibly difficult at this point. And I honestly don't know how you did it, where you didn't just shut down.
Yeah, it was fight or flight mode for me too. You know, when you get in those situations, it's kind of like, you know, you can sit there and pray for it to be over, but I knew I had to do something and that he needed some help, and that was, I just tunneled my focus, and that's what I did. When I was there and I kind of realized that I was going to need some help, I called back to the house to get some wire cutters. My hope was then that, you know, we'd be able to cut the wires, and then we'd get him to a vet, and then hopefully he would be okay. Once the wire was cut though, and he realized he was free, he was panicking and kind of frantic and running everywhere. And Sir Galahad was a very respectful boy, but he was so shook up that he was running into me, running me over. He was completely frantic. And unfortunately, the part that made this very hard to see was after he was freed from the wire, he had severed the tendons and ligaments from fighting the fence, and he actually couldn't lift up and flex the lower part of his leg. So he was falling all over the place and kind of freaking out, and I think he was like feeling, you know,
shock.
Yeah, shock. I can't feel my leg anymore. And when you're a big, you know, 1,500-pound minimum horse and you lose the control of one of your legs, that's a scary feeling.
I think that goes for anybody. Like, imagine when you would be in that situation. We might be able to understand because we see what's going on, but in that moment, shock takes over for him, and he just has no ability to redirect his energy even.
Yeah. And you think of the horse's frontal lobe too, right? When they feel enough fear, I feel like they kind of black out and they just solely panic, and they're not making
they're a prey.
They're not making thoughtful choices because that's what's kept them here that long. But he was probably in that fight or flight mode from the moment that he got stuck in that fence. And then when he got free, his instincts told him to run. And and he was scared, and he was running to me because he trusted me, and
you were a safety net for him.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I was kind of like, he was a bowling ball and I was a pin. He was big boy and taking me out. So it was not a fun situation to be in.
And that's just a reminder for any of our listeners, you know, horses are prey animals. And I think we talk about that a lot. But if you think about it, the barbed wire is like a predator to them. It's very similar to if you get bit, you're caught, you need to wiggle your way out. So if you ever have a horse caught in a fence, you probably will see them trying to wriggle and wiggle and move, and it's not always the right option, but that's the first thing they think to do. And then the next first thing they think to do is run. They got to get out.
Yeah.
So if you're ever caught up in a situation like that, trying to calm them is often one of the biggest things you have to think about, not just in the injury mode, but also the mind mode, which is such a difficult thing to even wrap your mind around, because you're just so focused on that injury and that emergency in that moment.
Side note, after this whole situation, I was kind of in some deep thought about what could I have done to prevent this whole thing from happening. And I mean, I don't think there really was much, but in the future, what I really kind of did some research on, and this is kind of a controversial piece, but after having this experience, my opinion kind of changed a bit about it. But hobbling your horse solely for this reason, I think, is if your horse is in a wire pen or a barbed wire pasture, it might not be a bad idea. I mean, do it with a professional or with someone that you trust and who knows how to handle a horse with hobbles and who has experience. But teaching your horse to kind of feel those hobbles and have the sensation of being trapped. I mean, sometimes you're not going to prevent your horse from getting into the fence, but you can prevent them from panicking. And I've known a couple horses who have gotten stuck in the fence and they have been hobbled. They learn that if I just kind of stand and wait and, soften or relax to the pressure, that, eventually a human will come out and help me. And I mean, I got Sir Galahad later in his life. I was young when I owned him, and that was not something that I was familiar with. But looking back on it, now that's something that I do with all of my horses. Not that I'm a avid hobbler, or not that I see any other purpose for me personally to do it, but for that reason solely, after going through this experience, I just want to make sure that my horses don't panic when they feel like they're stuck, because they can make, a little scrape a huge, unrecoverable injury. Some food for thought for you guys.
I think that's an excellent point, though. Hobbles, there's some very negative views of them, absolutely. And then others see them in a very good light. Yeah. And we're not here to judge you on what you feel with hobbles as a viewer, but we are giving you just maybe some food for thought, like Taya said.
Some different perspective.
Yeah, where it's like, okay, you're using it for a specific circumstance that could happen, that may never happen, but that way you have an option. And if you're not into the hobble situation, maybe if you are really good with liberty with your horse, or training in different ways, teaching them to look to you before they panic,
to soften the pressure.
Exactly.
Doing pressure work, and
not just regular pressure, extreme versions of pressure, because that fence is an extreme version of pressure.
Yeah, and I think we do a lot of, plastic bagging kind of vibe stuff. But tie some ropes around your horse's legs, get them used to that sensation and tighten it up. You could just use a lead shank or something.
It could save a life.
It could save a life, or make a vet bill significantly less.
Well, with that being said, we'll get right back into more about your story.
Yes.
So we just talked about how you guys both kind of went into that fight or flight, and you realized that things were a lot worse than you thought.
I was hoping I'm a optimist, and when I saw him stuck initially in the fence, I was like, well, it's going to be a long recovery. But, you know, I was hopeful that once we got him out, be able to get a vet out or take him to the vet, and then he would probably be on some rest, or his physical limitations might have been a little bit different. But given that, you know, he was retired, I wasn't too worried about lameness and stuff. I just wanted to see that, you know, he could be comfortable and live out his retirement. However, once that wire was cut, it had severed down to his bone. And yeah, it had cut the very important tendons and ligaments that are responsible for lifting and placing the foot down. And it wasn't like a clean cut through. And I'm sorry if this is very gruesome, but this is just the reality. It was quite shredded up.
And it also had lost a lot of blood. So
Yeah.
that's a factor in when you need to travel
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. So, you know, then I was like, okay, I need to make a decision. It was about 7:00 in the morning. The vet wasn't available, or I don't even think they were open at that time. And we were about 45 minutes to the nearest clinic. I didn't feel it was fair to get him in a trailer to the clinic. We were at the far back part of my pasture, and he was on 3 legs and panicking.
And I was just going to say, I don't even know how you'd get him into a trailer with that leg like that.
And in my gut, I did know that, you know, even if I did all of those things, his prognosis and the quality of life after an injury that's substantial was very poor. And given all of that, I didn't think it was fair to let him suffer any longer. It was a freak incident, and I love my horse, but I knew what I needed to do. I remember trying to get a hold of my mom and dad, just so I wanted to get a hold of them because, you know, he was a family horse, and I just wanted some guidance because I was having to make this choice. And of course, it was early. They were getting ready for work, and so they weren't answering their phones. And so I was calling mom and calling dad and calling mom and calling dad. Finally, the third time that I tried calling my mom, my dad had picked up the phone. I was obviously, you know, upset and coming to the terms and realization of we were going to have to end my beloved horse's life. So while I was explaining to my dad the situation, one of the worst things was hearing my mom in the background realize what was going on and just hearing her cry hysterically. She loved him. We all loved him. He was a legend. It was just really scary to have to make that call on my own without them there. But I was very lucky to have great neighbors and people there to help me with the rest of the process that I'm sure you guys can assume what we had to do next. To this day, very grateful to have them there because where I lived at the time, I was alone on this farm for at least half the year. And I got very lucky that there was people there to support me because I don't know how I would have done that on my own.
Yeah, totally. And you know what? I can understand hearing your parent upset. I don't know about you, but it makes me cry.
Yeah.
So I struggle with that. So I totally understand. And I think on behalf of myself and the listeners, I really do want to say thank you for sharing this because it's not easy at all. And
I can't believe I didn't cry. There's a couple moments where like, reel it in.
Yeah, of course. Totally fair for you to feel that way. Even though it happened a few years ago, it feels very fresh. And so thank you for sharing it. It is a very vulnerable moment. And I hope the listeners really appreciate that story for the fact that you were able to tell it. Knock on wood. I've never experienced something like that. Even saying knock on wood stresses me out. I've never had to make that call. I can only imagine based on the story, the trauma associated with such an experience. I can understand how that loss would be so impactful. And with that, I think we move on to talking about how did that loss impact you emotionally and mentally, not just in the moment, but after.
I was crushed and traumatized. I don't know if it was PTSD symptoms, but I had nightmares for a few weeks. And one of the things that would really bother me was the sound of the barbed wire fence just reefing. And I would hear that when I would be falling asleep. And then when I'd be, again, trying to fall asleep too, I would just see the visual of his mangled up leg and the puddle of blood and him running me over. And thankfully, I have had a very good life and I haven't gone through too many traumatizing things, but It was very, I don't know if surprising is the right word, but it was very crazy how, after all of it said and done, your mind and your body, the things that happen to you after an experience like that. It was very heavy, and it scared me a little bit to think that I was potentially forever changed by
The experience,
yeah.
With this being a heavier experience that unfortunately many people can sympathize with, we all love the idea of our horses passing peacefully in their sleep, but the reality is, I would say like 80% of the time, it doesn't end in a nice way like that. It may not be as traumatizing or emotionally scarring, but it's still not usually in like a peaceful manner. And so I think many people can sympathize with the experience you've had. And I do think it's also important that we see some good that came from this. Just like you said, you're an optimist. So I'm going to ask, how did this experience shift your mindset in a nice way on horse ownership and training? Because there's so many negatives we can talk about. Let's talk about a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me more appreciative. I would say that's the number one thing. You truly never know. I never really understood that statement until I had this experience. I really try to stay positive, and I don't want anyone's last ride to be an upsetting one for the horse and the rider. I try much harder to set up every experience to be a positive one, even if it's hard, even if we're working through tougher things or I'm pushing a little bit more. I kind of have the mindset now that even though it's hard to be positive sometimes, it would be even harder knowing that the horse's last ride or last interaction with humans wasn't a good one. That's what I mostly took away, professionally and in my work with horses and horse ownership, is just always see the positive and always try and be positive, because you never know when your last ride is going to be.
What I've even learned from your story is that like your horse is your friend, and sometimes they frustrate us. Like, let's be real. There are times where you sit there and you're like, I swear to God, Rumor, if you're listening, that trailering experience that I took 5 hours to get you into a trailer nearly killed both of us. I was so done with you. I still love you, but so fucking done. And even when you have those moments where you're like, I just can't with you right now, you never know what's gonna happen tomorrow.
No.
So trying to bring your headspace back, which is incredibly difficult, and I'm not trying to say, oh, I can easily do this, because after that experience I didn't like him for like a good 2 hours.
Easier said than done, but I think after having a traumatic experience like that, it just puts a whole new perspective in mind of, you truly never know when that last moment is going to be. You could look out in your pasture and your horses all look fine, and then 20 minutes later you're out there
and they're not,
and they're bleeding out at a crazy rate.
Anyways, thank you for sharing what the positives were. I know you were still working through lots during this time. Did you find it hard to do both? As many of the listeners know, and I think we've touched on in our first episode, we both work with horses. Like, we're not just horse owners, but horse professionals. So working with horses, grieving and coping with loss, how hard was that as a horse owner and a professional? And do you find it still kind of lingered?
That's a good question. Honestly, having to just go on while still grieving is so damn hard. And I know that's a huge unfortunate part of the human experience, not just here with horses, but life has to go on. And for that first little while, God, it was hard. I don't think I slowed down enough and grieved. I just kept on going. And I think maybe that was kind of my coping strategy. I stayed busy with other things to distract myself. But honestly, I'm still kind of grieving it. When we were putting this podcast together, one of the things that I was thinking about was, do I have to be over this? Is it okay that I'm still sad? And I've kind of come to the terms that I am sad about it still. I love that horse. And I've kind of come to a spot where I'm comfortable with this grief, because I feel it means that the experience and the time that Sir Galahad and I had together was so special. And the fact that my heart is so broken that he's gone, I get to carry that with me for the rest of my life. It hurts hard because I loved hard, that is a very, very, very big privilege that I don't take lightly, and that I'm grateful for.
Grief is so personal because, like you said, you didn't really take time to grieve, and that was your coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Whereas that's allowed, you know? Grief is personal to each individual that experiences it, and no journey is the same at all. It's really important that we as individuals allow space for other individuals to grieve how they need to grieve and hurt how they need to hurt. We need to acknowledge that hurt as spectators, I guess, if that's the right word to use. Pain is a big step to healing, allowing that pain to kind of maybe not overtake your life, but take you in that moment is not wrong. And with that, can you share some things that worked or didn't work for you at that time?
I think you were kind of getting on to a point that I think is very important and a lot of people need to hear. Feel the pain, feel the hurt. I think that's a huge part of grieving is like, God, be sad. Listen to that sad song or that song that, you know, makes you think of, you know, whoever or whatever you lost. And
watch
just
Marley and Me if you need a good cry, you know.
Honestly,
Marley though, I'm just I'm just saying though, because like if you think about it, oftentimes the people who have a delayed reaction where it's like a week or 2 weeks and then they finally break down and they actually feel better.
Yeah.
You know, like allow that breakdown. It's not a weakness.
No. And yeah, let yourself feel those feelings, cry it out, release it from your body. I found that if I just held in that emotion and kept going, as we know, horses are mirrors, and even though you can tuck that crap right underneath the rug and put on a smiley, cheery, happy face, those horses feel it. And I think I found the biggest change in myself is just when I really sat down and was like, yeah, I'm sad. It's okay. And talking about it too. Like most things, I feel like we're all kind of surprised at how many people have been through, maybe not the exact same experience, but I know I was surprised at how many people had been through something similar. And that gave me comfort. The fact that I work with horses too also made me spend time with them. And while at the time it was hard to be around horses, I'm grateful I stayed disciplined and that I just went through it and stuck around them because they're big healers as well.
Yeah. I guess what would you wish someone had told you back then?
It's okay to be upset. Not that people didn't say that, but I wish I believed it. I wished I watched more Marley and Me's.
I think that's actually an important point, though. You're acknowledging that people gave you the space to be upset, but you didn't give it yourself.
Yeah.
And we need to be mindful as individuals to ourselves and allowing ourselves to feel, because people do allow you to, and oftentimes it's us.
Yourself. Yeah. It's yourself. You think that you just have to go on, but you don't. Like, you do, but
you don't right away.
Yeah, and you can be sad. It's okay. It's part of the human experience. I think this experience has taught me a lot of things, obviously. But one of the things that I'm not going to say that I'm excited to share with you, but I feel like it's important to share with you guys is the lesson about preparation and having protocols in place for myself and for potentially you guys if a situation like this ever happens to you or ever happens to Britain or whoever's listening.
This is probably not the funnest topic. And definitely the conversations are uncomfortable. They really are. Like, let's be real about it. It's uncomfortable. It's something that we need to have a conversation about so that we can have an idea of what a plan looks like and give you guys as viewers an understanding of maybe why it's important to have this conversation and to know what you're going to do if something happens. It's really hard to think when you're in the thick of it or when the incident occurs. So if you have maybe like a little binder, I don't know how you choose to do it, and we'll go into depth of this a little bit more, but having that physical copy to know what the options are for you in that moment might even give you some comfort and peace of mind to get through the situation itself.
So that's why today on Uncinched, we're giving you some tips and ideas on how to prepare for your horse's death. I sound like the Grim Reaper, and I'm sorry, it's not funny, but this is another coping mechanism of mine as I joke.
And that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay, guys. Maybe you're crying and laughing at the same time now.
That's what I usually do.
Yeah. So, anyways, while losing a horse is hard enough, having an idea of what the process is like and what you need to plan, I think can help you when the time comes.
Exactly. With that, this is only options and tools for your toolbox per se. We aren't vets. We won't claim to be, but we are horse owners. We are horse professionals, and we just want to give you some options. If you are listening, make sure you do consult like your veterinary team to understand your options and develop an action plan in advance that works for your specific circumstances, because we're going to give more generalities since we don't know you and we don't know what's
maybe I do know you.
We don't know what your specific circumstances are, and it may not fit what we talk about for you specifically. So make sure you are consulting your veterinary team and your veterinary professionals that you feel comfortable with. We also do think it's really important to have a base knowledge in case of emergency. And we do strongly recommend any horse owner or equine professional take a first aid course or seminar. It doesn't mean you have to be certified, but at least having the knowledge and having a book that you can understand in order to feel a bit more prepared and understand when it's actually a time to panic and not. Because sometimes those injuries look gruesome, and then you look at it a bit more and you're like, oh, it's just a bleeder, you know. And you need to have base knowledge to kind of figure out where you want to go with the situation. So we highly recommend you have an equine first aid course. There's so many options for these types of courses and seminars. You can often get them through colleges, independent companies. And if you'd like more information regarding these resources, please feel free to message and reach out. We're more than happy to kind of give you a base on where to go and where to look. Because sometimes that's the hardest part, is actually just knowing where to even go. Now that we've kind of gotten those two pieces out of the way, we're going to actually talk to you about a death plan. And we've called it an acronym that will make it a little bit easier to remember for you. So it's RIPP, Rest in Peace Plan. That's what we're going to talk about here.
All right. We are going to get right into it. And the first thing that we want to talk about is giving you guys an understanding of the different euthanasia options that are available out there. There are a few different ones, and I kind of want to start this topic off with what works for you might not work for other people, and it's important to respect other people's choices, even if it's not the same choice that you would make. But it's important that we make choices that are ethical, humane. We know numerous options because, as I'm sure you guys have gathered from the situation that I unfortunately went through, there was limited options available to me in order to do the deed that had to be done.
Yeah, and it's also about having informed decision making, because if you don't know there's other options, sometimes it can make things way more difficult.
Yes. So that's why hopefully you're going to leave this podcast with a lot more knowledge, and you will have a few options in the back of your mind. Everyone has an opinion on what's humane and what's not humane, and it's important that you kind of sit in and think about all of the different options.
And we're not here to tell you what is right or wrong. We're just giving you the bare bones of what your options are.
The first option that I want to talk about is the use of a firearm or gun or whatever you want to call it. In my case, that was the most humane option available in the circumstance. Was that ideal personally? That is debatable, but got the job done, and it was painless and quick. Now, if you are going to go the route of gunshot, make sure that you or whoever does the deed knows where to put that bullet so that that horse does not suffer. A little piece too that I want to talk about is the financial piece of horse death, and we will talk about this as we go on. You guys will hear. Spoiler alert. Finance-wise, this is probably your most cost-effective method. However, please make sure that you or whoever does this, again, knows how and where to put that bullet in so that this process is quick and easy.
And done properly.
And
because
done properly,
it's
yes.
not just a trigger and shoot situation. Obviously, it is to an extent, but yeah, just making sure you're informed of how to do this type of euthanasia, or the person who's providing you the service does know.
Yes.
The next option that we're giving you is chemical euthanasia. Usually the horse is sedated before euthanasia is given. Obviously, certain circumstances may allot for different methods in that sense, but that sedation is meant to help them calm down. However, if they're already in a fight or flight situation, there are often times where they don't calm down, and they'll try and fight the sedation, they'll try and fight the situation. And sometimes even if they were already calm, because something's changing in their body and they're not sure what's going on because of that prey drive, they fight it. And it doesn't always happen, but I have seen it happen, and it can be pretty hard to watch.
Especially if you're not prepared for it.
Absolutely. And that's why we want you to be prepared, where we're like, hey, this is an option, but also this is what you might see.
Know the pros and cons.
Yeah, exactly.
Know the pros and cons so that you can make an informed decision.
Yeah. So if that's the case, like, you might not want to be in that moment there and have the vet contact you when they've kind of calmed down. Anyways, yeah, it can be pretty explosive, and it can be a pretty rough thing to watch, especially if you're already putting your horse down, which is an emotional situation. If that happens, it's fairly normal. And I just don't want you to freak out and think that something's happening that it's not. Be prepared for that if it happens. It doesn't always happen, but there's a chance of it. That is another option. That's where the vet comes out and kind of helps them pass. Basically, their heart starts to slow down and their body functions start to shut down, and they just pass a little bit more peacefully, we hope.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, we're not horses.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what that actually feels like, but that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, this is an opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I feel like chemical euthanasia is kind of more for people so that that process goes a little bit smoother, right?
And it's not as abrupt.
Yeah.
You have some time to kind of say goodbye.
Yeah.
In a way that you can have them, like if you have a dog, for example, you can have them on your lap as they pass and go into that either whatever you believe, next realm or death. You know, I have been a part of quite a few euthanasias. That's not funny. I don't know why I laughed, but I have been through quite a few euthanasias through I worked in some vet clinics. It's just one of those things that it's an option. It might work for you, it might not. So
yeah, think about the kind of person you are and what your beliefs are, and then hopefully these options kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what maybe you would want to choose. And then again, if you were in a certain situation and you have a preference of one option, but maybe that option is not readily available.
Absolutely.
You know, being informed that there are other options and that it can get done ethically and humanely is, I think, important for you to know.
Sometimes, like we've said, circumstances don't shake out how we want them to all the time. And from what I know about you, Taya, I think it's fair to assume that wasn't your first choice.
No.
But because of the circumstances that you were in, you had to make that decision.
Yeah.
And so it's important to recognize also, if you ever hear somebody's story, that it may not have been their first choice, but but that's where they had to go.
Respect, peace, and love, boys and girls. All right, so I want to talk back to the financial aspect of chemical euthanasia. In this economy, finances can be tight. I mean, I'm in my 20s and it's expensive out there.
Especially with horses.
Especially with horses, yes. So I want you guys to, again, be informed about everything. So keep in mind that paying for a veterinarian's time, the sedative, and the euthanasia adds up. Just because your horse is not leaving that appointment alive does not mean the bill is free.
And with that, we're not just saying vet appointments are expensive, because even if you go the other route, you still have to pay for whatever happens after that point. So it's not just saying that veterinary care or euthanasia using chemical means is going to just cost you money, but both will.
Basically, losing a horse costs money.
Yep.
So again, if you decide that chemical euthanasia is the route that you want to go for, maybe as part of your RIP plan, Ask your vet for a quote, and then you can prepare and have money set aside in your emergency fund to prepare for this situation. It just means you have one less thing to stress about if your horse decides he wants to visit Jesus unexpectedly. The next thing that we want to talk about is aftercare options. Basically, what you do with the body after the euthanasia is complete. If you live on your own land and you wish to bury your horse, know your burial area. Call the call before you dig company and ensure that you are digging in a safe spot. It would suck if you dug a hole and you hit a water line or you hit a power line or you hit something.
And that's on top of just losing your horse.
Yes.
And now you lose your electricity and your water.
Yeah, make sure you call and that you have that spot pre-planned. Call your county to see what rules and regulations are set in place for animal burial. Every county is a little bit different, and you may have to report it, or there may be restrictions, especially if your horse is buried under or near some farmland.
It also is important to understand the way they died, because that also does sometimes affect burial options. Knowing the depth you have to be, there's just so many factors in it. So if you are able to create, like we said, that RIPP plan, it allows you to kind of have that in hand. We also think you should really be making sure you're digging a deep enough hole, because unfortunately there are animal scavengers. They can smell things and sometimes dig things up, and I think that would be a pretty awful sight for you and your children if you have any. As well as a horse is quite big. We don't always realize it, but they're really big, and some counties require you to have that animal buried like 8 feet underground. A hole for a horse is huge, and digging that by hand is pretty much unrealistic. Especially if the euthanasia is already done, you have a limited time before the body's mechanisms start to essentially fail.
Yeah, that horse's body will decay.
Exactly.
And unless you want coyotes and the neighbor's dog to be eating your poor horse, you kind of have to get that hole dug in a timely manner.
If you have equipment to dig a hole, that is ideal. But if you don't, what are your options, right? And if you don't have farmland, what are your options? My recommendation, I guess, would be to rent equipment if you have the option, like an excavator. But if you're older or really young, that may not be something that you can do. Also, if you're in Canada and your horse dies in the winter, you have to remember that ground freezes. So it may not even be an option. And if it is, the equipment needs to be fairly strong, because it's going to be really hard ground. Again, to prepare you guys, make sure you know where the nearest rental place is. Make sure that they have excavators, have a flat deck trailer big enough to pull it. Or if you don't own one, make sure you can figure out how you get one. If these aren't even options, knowing that, it's important to know that these might be an inhibitor for your burial process. Weather also is an inhibitor on how this might work for getting equipment there or bringing it back or even using it for the ground. Back to the financial part though, renting ain't free, That's what we really want to make sure we're coming across. Like, this is not a free process. Just because your horse passes away does not mean all your expenses go away. Be prepared and prepare yourself by getting a quote early on. And it may not even be the same, but at least you know a starting number of what you might be looking at. So you're prepared for when this shitty situation happens.
Alrighty. There are also another option. Let's say it's wintertime. Let's say you board your horse. Let's say you can't bury your horse on your property. There are body disposal services. Depending on the area, there are numerous companies that exist that will dispose your horse's body for you if you can't bury your horse. Know who's local to you beforehand so that you are prepared.
This is important for finances, because if you're choosing someone way out of the way, it's going to cost you more, because oftentimes they use mileage.
Yes, exactly. Another thing to keep in mind too, a lot of these disposal companies will take the bodies generally to a landfill of some sort. Some people don't care, whereas other people do. We aren't here to judge you. Make whatever choice is right for you, but we feel it's important for you guys to hear the reality so that you can make an informed choice that's best for you. Keep in mind again, the financial aspect. These companies are businesses and you will be charged for the removal of your horse's body.
As an added way to reach your financing goal, because we all know horses are expensive and life is expensive. Sometimes we don't feel like money is coming in fast enough for the situations we're in. And when we're in an emergency situation, especially when it's unexpected, it can be a real financial strain. So if you have the ability to set aside about 10% of your paycheck to that emergency fund, I'm not saying you have to be rich. I'm not saying you have to make a ton of money. 10% could be, if you have $500 coming in on that paycheck, $5 does add up. And it's way better to have something than nothing at all, even if it's just $5, because it will help you in the long run. And being financially prepared, even with just a small amount, can help you deal with an already quite stressful situation, and it might be able to take some of that load off. That's something I personally do. I think it's a really great habit to maintain. I'm not saying you have to, but it gives you just something to think about, like food for thought, on how you might be able to limit the cost of these expenses, especially when unexpected. Obviously, there are always opportunities to add more to an emergency fund. I'm not saying only add 10%. You can never add any more. This is with a grain of salt, of course. This can give you a less stressful way to manage extra expenses and save up for something that you know may happen in the future. And if you never have to use it, great. Use it to buy a new horse. I don't know. But at least you have it there.
Yeah. And that's where it's important for all of the services and options that we listed just a few moments ago to get some quotes so that you can have a little bit of a ballpark idea of what you're going to be paying when the time comes, and for you to be prepared for that, because I feel a lot of people forget about all of the unfortunate realities that come with horse death.
We also know that not everyone lives in a city or has close access to veterinary care. So it's really important you are factoring in where you live and how you're able to deal with emergencies and loss. We personally are based in Alberta, Canada, closer to multiple vet services because we're in a city. That's not the reality for a lot of rural Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. It can be really hard, as I know there's a real crisis of vet shortages. There are at times where you only have access to one vet, and they may either be off on vacation, off because they have a life too. We can't expect them to be there 24/7. Maybe they're already at another call. They can't pick up the phone in a timely manner, or they say, yeah, I'm on my way, but I'm an hour away, and that's not timely care. Be mindful of this fact for your RIP plan. That's why we also feel this is a great talk, so you know your alternatives and options, and it's things that you don't really think about until you have to. So let's think about them before we have to.
All right, so now that you guys have a little bit of an RIP plan, I just wanted to give another little tidbit of a reminder that you need to take care and add your mental health care to your RIP plan. Use your mental health resources as necessary. Don't be afraid to talk to a therapist, to your family, friends, or your community as you need. Hey, if you guys want to talk to us, our DMs are always open, and we would be so happy to talk and consult with you guys about the loss of a horse, because we get it. It's important to remember that seeking comfort through others and seeking professional help does not make you weak. If anything, I think it requires strength to recognize what you need and finding the right avenues and resources for you. Again, add it to your RIP plan. Take care of you just as much as you take care of your horse.
The same goes for needing a break from the horse interactions. You know, either you're going to want to be around them more or less, and either option is okay. Like, don't feel pressure to be one or the other. If you need to take a step back from work or social engagements for a little bit, that's okay, obviously within reason, because if you're completely withdrawing from society and life, that is a sign that you need more help. And if you find that you're in that situation, again, seek the necessary resources. Don't shut people out, but if you need a few days to process, that's really normal and more than acceptable. And as horse professionals, if a horse passes away and we can't take that time to be around horses for a bit, that's okay. You are allowed to talk to a client. You are allowed to go see that person and saying, hey, you know, I know we had a body work session. This happened to me. You don't have to explain yourself, but you can just gently nudge them and say, my horse passed away. I'm going to need a few days. I'll get back to you on appointment times. Take that space if you have to. Like, don't feel bad about needing that space. You can move through trauma and become stronger and more compassionate due to the fact that you have a better understanding based on your own situation. And it might give you a different perspective. So when somebody else comes and talks to you and shares their experience, you kind of have a bird's eye view, but also you might be able to share what you've been through to comfort them. Try and find ways to move through this trauma that feel authentic to you so you can become stronger.
Well, if you listen to this till the end, all we want to say is thank you. Thank you for being a part of such a vulnerable and honestly uncomfortable conversation. Horse ownership is beautiful, but it's not always easy. Having these uncomfortable conversations now can help those devastating moments, whenever they may happen, be a little bit easier when the time comes.
We want to make sure we are providing you guys with actionable advice and relevant information, which is why we chose to do this episode. If you've enjoyed it, learned something new, or are looking for more resources regarding horse loss, please feel free to reach out through our email, which is linked in our socials and in our podcast description. We really do want to be helpful. So if you have any feedback, comments, or a story you wish to share with us regarding this, feel free to DM or use our uncinch confessions form in our podcast description and link tree. If you don't want us to know who you are, that's totally okay. We really want to create an empowered, kind, and educated community. If you do enjoy what we're doing, we'd be very grateful if you'd rate the podcast and subscribe, because it'll allow us to keep doing what we're doing and knowing what's hitting and what's not. Please do subscribe, and we hope you are enjoying the podcast.
And since we mentioned confessions, this would be a great time to remind you guys that we do an Uncinched Confessions segment where we read out stories, hot takes, and questions from you, the viewers, anonymously. The future confessions episode, we want to focus on pet peeves with our horses and the industry. Click the form to add your submission, and you might be featured on our episode. We will see you next time on the Uncinched podcast. Thank you again for listening.